Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. With more than 10 days of the war in Ukraine and no resolution in sight, New Delhi continued a tightrope walk to stick to its pro-diplomacy, pro-peace stance. Safe and swift evacuation of Indians stranded in the conflict zone was the government's priority all through the week. But beyond the headlines, the manner in which the Western media has conducted itself in analyzing the Ukraine situation vis-a-vis conflicts in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, etc. has generated a huge debate in the media circles worldwide. And that is what we will discuss on Media Scan this evening. But first up, what made news? With just a few hundred Indians left back in Ukraine by the weekend, the government doubled up its efforts to bring everyone back to Indian soil. Both commercial airlines as well as Indian Air Force aircrafts were pulled into the mission Operation Ganga. Senior ministers camped in the neighboring countries of Ukraine to facilitate things, while government disagreed with the Russian position that Indians were being used as human shields in the war zone. With continued diplomatic efforts, government did succeed in convincing both Ukraine and Russia to allow safe passage for everyone. With pressure mounting to take sides in the highly polarized situation, New Delhi preferred the tightrope walk to stick to its pro-peace, pro-diplomacy stance, whether in the UN General Assembly resolution, the UNHCR, the IAEA or the Quad platform. From day one, India has maintained that only diplomacy can help find a resolution to the vexed crisis. Even in his telephonic conversations with world leaders, including premiers of Russia and Ukraine, Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for immediate cessation of violence. Uttar Pradesh will vote for the penultimate round on Monday, bringing to close the 7-phase election process for the assembly. The campaign, which ended with Prime Minister Modi holding a gala roadshow in Varanasi, witnessed sharp political barbs being exchanged between the BJP, the Samajwadi Party and the Congress. Electioneering is already over in Punjab, Goa, Uttarakhand and Manipur. Results of all the 5 states will be declared on March 10th. Trinamool Congress swept the recently held municipal elections in West Bengal, but voting was marred by innumerable incidents of violence, arson, complaints of preventing voters from casting their vote, beating of rival candidates, and even complaints of molestation of female candidates by TMC workers. Latest GDP data shows a slowdown at 5.4% compared to the expected, which was above 7. But GST collection was up by 18% in February, denoting an uptick in trade and commercial activities. Viewers, people all over the world are witnessing horrible, scary scenes of bombardments, explosions, nuclear threat, and such other war scenes coming out of Ukraine on their TV screens, on the digital media. But even as this violence rages on, and New Delhi, like some other countries in the world, is stressing on cessation of violence immediately, there is another debate and a very interesting, a very concerning one going on in the media circles worldwide. That is questions being raised, issues being discussed about how the media all over the world, most particularly the Western media, is conducting itself in covering the violence, the war in Ukraine, when vis-a-vis compared to similar violence or wars or conflicts when they happen in, say, Afghanistan or the Middle East or African countries or even in some parts of South America. Why is there such a difference in the attitudes, in the reflections, in the analysis of these media houses, these well-known worldwide publications and media platforms? And related to that, the question whether Today, in 2022, is there still racism in the minds of the West when it comes to peace, conflicts, development, the future, and the societal issues of the so-called third world vis-a-vis the Western world? Is there a patronizing attitude when they talk about us and other people like us compared to violence and wars when they hit closer home, say in Europe, as is going on now? To discuss all of these issues, to decipher the complexities that I have just mentioned here, I have today on Media Scan a very special panel of guests who will help us understand these complexities and also share their perspective with us. Allow me to welcome my first guest for the evening. Joining me on Media Scan this evening, straight from the US, Avatans Kumar, who has agreed to join us to discuss this very serious and sensitive issue. You have heard him on Media Scan earlier. Welcome back to our show, Avatans Kumar, and I hope you are following what's going on in the media over Ukraine.
Thank you, Smita. Thanks for having me on your show. Pleasure.
I also have with me another friend, senior journalist, well-known analyst. You have been following her on social media, a very strong voice there, and her regular news reports. Aarti Tikku, a senior journalist and now the editor-in-chief of the digital platform, The New Indian. Welcome back, Aarti.
Thanks, Smita. Lovely to be here once again.
So let's get on with the show right away. And I want to start the discussion with Avatans Kumar first. Avatans Kumar, have you been following how the CNN, the Al Jazeera, the BBC, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal have been covering the current conflict in Ukraine? Have you seen all those long threads of tweets where people have pointed out, called out clearly their racist treatment of the violence going on there when compared to similar situations in other parts of the world, such as the Middle East or other Asian countries or even Africa? Also, being there an observer and a regular follower of their reports, do you feel there is really now in 2022 such kind of a racist, patronizing attitude in the Western media world when it comes to other parts of the globe? Avatans.
Yes, thank you, Smita, for the question. Yes, I have been following, but first of all, let me say that I'm here on my, I'm associated with a lot of organizations, but I'm here in my personal capacity.
Yes.
And all opinions are mine.
Point taken.
And yes, and you see, we have seen all the racist tweets and all that, and the heart of it is that the liberal Western media is very much engaged in these kind of racist attitudes, where you have to see that, in order to make a distinction, you have to other somebody. And this kind of othering has been happening for quite a long time, and the liberal media is quite apt at doing this. You will, even in the British general, when he was talking on BBC, he was talking about people who look like us and live like us.
Yes.
That's where othering comes from, and even the tweets, they're whites, they're Christians.
When senior people, analysts, journalists, army officers, and, so-called strategists start identifying people by how they look or how they speak, etc.
Yes, absolutely. So that's when the othering comes from, and they define these kind of otherings in a very interesting way.
Okay.
Because see, if it's just the color, there is a difference. The Russians are the same color. They kind of have the same kind of faith background, but then they come up and say, "Oh, it's Eastern." When it becomes very convenient for them, Russia becomes Eastern country, and so that's how the othering becomes. And the other part is also.
So, are you saying, Avatans Kumar, that even within Europe, there is this othering going on? What to talk of other, parts of the globe?
Right. absolutely. And then there is also the thinking that they are superior, they are virtuous, they are better than others, and those kind of feelings. I'm not going to say that the entire population is racist. I've lived in this country for about 30 years, and very nice people. Everybody is not racist, but this is very pervasive in elite Western media setup.
So I'll come back to you in trying to further understand why in a world like this, when liberalism is such a word to be thrown at us Asians or at every step, why they are not able to apply it upon themselves. But I shall come to that in the next question. Before that, I am sure Aarti wants to share something with us, both in terms of her observation of the coverage of the Western media in this particular case, and also her earlier experiences with the Western media, and whether the debate that is raging at this point, is it really true? Does it really happen, and how? Aarti, please join the debate and tell us, what do you think?
Well, Smita, the biggest truth that remained hidden from Indian audience for almost 30 years or so was that the Western media, has never been objective, has never been unbiased, has never been impartial to the Eastern world.
Right.
In fact, there's a theory called Orientalism, which was theorized by Edward Said precisely to make this point that the West looks down on the East, and that bias, that prejudice against people on the East comes through its literature and media. So we are not saying anything new. It's been happening for several hundreds of years, especially when the West began colonizing the rest of the world. So this is
allow me a very quick query here. I can understand such thoughts and ideas, dominating or pervading at a time when there was a colonial setup in most countries, and all countries were trying to throw away colonialism and try to come out independent. But today, at this stage, why do you think this still persists?
Well, in this particular case, as your Avtans actually pointed out earlier, that within the Western civilization, there is a schism which nobody likes to talk about. In fact, nobody wants to pay attention to it. That schism is really the schism of the church. And that church is actually divided between Vatican Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. Those two churches, their philosophies, their approaches are not similar. It's almost like Shia-Sunni schism, which the West does not like to talk about. The Christians in the West do not like to talk about. But really, this schism is about the Catholics and the Orthodox.
Okay, hold it. Can you explain, for the benefit of our viewers, that this division in the church, which has a historic perspective, may actually be playing out here in today's situation without anybody saying it in so many words?
It is absolutely playing out, because look the way Western media has covered the war between Russia and Ukraine. The persistence of the Western media to project Putin as a monster, as evil, Russia as an invader, an aggressor, without actually telling the audience the context in which this war is happening. They do not tell the democratic world, because only democratic world has really media which is open. For example, India is open to Western media. India is open to every media. India is an open society. So nobody will tell you the context in which this war is happening. The fact is, in the Donbas region, in which two republics have been declared as independent by President Putin, there Russians have been facing a kind of persecution which nobody has talked about, nobody has paid attention to. You will not find any mention of it.
If I may add, actually, about what was going on in the Donbas region for all this time, People actually came to know about it only, when this current conflict happened. And, some reference was made by Russian people over this, because, I mean, as you said, in a classic case of suppression of facts, what was going on or happening in the Donbas region never actually came out to people like us. However, that is a very interesting point to bring in Avtans Kumar back into the discussion here. Avtans Kumar, just now Aarti was talking about, how President Putin has been painted as a monster. And while it is correct that the violence needs to be deplored in the strongest terms, but people have very cleverly avoided explaining, the perspective or the background of this whole violence and the conflict. On that point, there is another very interesting question I had in mind. And this is not something we are saying, Avtans. People in the West sitting in London and other cities of Europe have called it out, saying that the Western world is so unnerved with the fiercely balanced position taken by New Delhi in this entire scenario. And they are so hell-bent on pressurizing us to take sides that perhaps they have started now using the media as a tool to create a situation where India is pressured to take sides with the West. And several stories that have been pointed out in the CNN, on BBC and such platforms, they seem to, sort of point towards it, because they are bringing out anti-India issues suddenly without any provocation, without any news takeoff. Suddenly out of the blue, all kinds of stories about Indian society and casteism and the status of women and things are being featured day and night. What do you think?
See, I have been saying for a while now that we are in a propaganda war, and Ukraine is the new COVID. The entire COVID episode, at least in the US, we started, it was kind of propaganda war, added with the censor, big tech censor, and all kinds of censorship. Our Google, for example, is the biggest censorship agent that we have in the world currently.
Why?
So, it suppresses all the news. For example, if you remember when Tulsi Gabbard was running for presidential election, and the way she was countering current Vice President Kamala Harris, and she answered, and she was trending, and with the Google algorithm, her trend was killed, and Tulsi Gabbard has now filed a lawsuit against Google about that. And if you look at any time, the way Google has been suppressing news during the COVID time, anything that is not homogeneous with the idea that the powers be have been proposing, those news items just disappear. All the YouTube videos of people who had different views on COVID, they all disappeared. The scientists and professors have been canceled. So that's a big propaganda war that is going on in this world right now. And when it comes to now Ukraine, that's another propaganda war. White House and current White House openly asking the media outlets and the big tech to suppress any views that are that don't match with the pervasive view of the elites.
By the way, Avtans Kumar, while you are talking to us about what's going on in the White House briefings, meanwhile, this propaganda war is not ending anytime soon, because we have just learned that Russia has completely banned BBC and various other platforms of the West from being shown in their Russian, televisions completely, both digital and television.
Yep, and you will see that the RT and other Russian outlets have been banned. People of opposing view are not, able to come up on mainstream media. But if you have to listen to some of the information, you have to go to, non-mainstream media. You have to go to Rumble. You have to go to their podcast to listen to them.
So this
they are
is
not
blocking
covered.
information. I mean, to put it
Yes.
in a quick line. This is blocking information. On that point, Avtans, I just have a very quick question for Aarti here. Aarti, we are talking about the propaganda war going on. You know that several well-known global platforms have been banned by the Russian government now. On the other hand, Russia today has shut up its shop in Washington. In America, people have been asked to, go home. They have been laid off with some salary given to them. And then you have these stories which are being put in a certain light because perhaps Western diplomacy is using the media as a tool to pressurize, countries like India, which do not want to pander anybody's line in this situation. In the coming days, since you have yourself been caught in a propaganda war between India and Pakistan and the Western world at times in your career, how do you see it playing out in the coming days? Is there any hope of getting the true story from anywhere?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad that India has taken a very objective stand on this particular issue, Russia and Ukraine crisis that we are seeing right now. I'm also glad that India abstained from voting at both the UNSC and UNGA. Having said that, we are not insulated from the psy-ops that the Western media is doing. We are not insulated from the propaganda war that is being fought by the Western media on behalf of NATO countries and Ukraine. So we here in India need to know what is really happening. One, the world seems to be now entering another Cold War 2.0. We are seeing a similar situation that existed before the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991, and therefore we will not have. The fact is that the Western supremacy is over. We are now seeing a struggle. We're now seeing that the Western supremacy is being challenged by Russia and perhaps all the countries who are either neutral or who are openly, brazenly supporting Russia. So what?
Okay, Aarti, I am afraid I do not have. Yes, please make your point.
So my point is that we need to take the Western media propaganda and information that is coming out from the West with not a pinch of salt, but with a bucket of salt. We will have to learn to differentiate between information and propaganda. We will have to also look at the information that is coming out of Russia and then make up our own mind instead of just following blindly the Western media.
So, because this is Media Scan and this was precisely the next question I had in mind. We never like to close our episode without a solution to whatever we are discussing, Aarti. And because I have very little time left on my episode now, just very quickly put, as you were saying just now, the common consumer of news is a very gullible individual. They like to believe what they read and they watch and they are shown on digital platforms. So when, on the one hand, you are saying that we are kind of becoming a platform, we are becoming an instrument for the psyops from both sides. So how does a common citizen, how does he or she discern and differentiate and understand what is actually news and what is being played out as part of diplomacy or worse, as psyops?
Well, it's the Indian media's responsibility to really present both sides of the picture. We here who are working as journalists, who are running media platforms, including the New Indian, it is our responsibility to present both sides of the story. It is completely unfair to just copy paste and take cues from the Western media. We're not their slaves. We should be using our own analysis and judgments based on what we are reading and seeing from the platforms across the world. So I would say that it is our responsibility.
Fine, wise words there, Aarti. And just before we wind up our episode, I want to bring back Avtans here, who has been so kind, to find the time to join us from the US. Avtans Kumar, sitting there in the US, when you see all these diplomatic and media games playing out and countries like India, getting pulled into the debate, what are really your concluding words before we can wind up the show? What would you tell the Western media about their attitude towards countries like ours or other parts of the globe? And the same question which I put to Aarti, how can gullible citizens, innocent people, understand what is psyops and what is actually news?
It's very difficult for common people to understand or navigate through the news or whatever is presented from the mainstream media.
Yes,
You have
sir.
to sift through these items on your own, use your own judgment, and make your own decision. About Indian media, it reminds me of a quote from Wounded Civilization by V.S. Naipaul.
Yes.
And he said, I'm paraphrasing, that the Indian journalists never developed, they always reported on India as a foreign journalist or something like that. So Indian journalists have to present the news and views with Indian perspective and Indian viewpoint.
You are very cleverly putting it on all of us, sir. You have no message for the Western media?
The Western media remember yesterday on one of the TV shows, one of the guests was being called wrongly, Mr. McAdam or something. He was referred to. Then Mr. McAdam put out a statement after this episode, and he basically said that, at least Indian media, they are doing something different. Here in the US, it's all fake news, and he was not making any making any exaggeration.
So that's a very interesting point to end our discussion here, because while we knew what the gaffe that happened, we didn't know the next statement that came from the actual guest. However, thank you for that, Avtans Kumar. And on that note, I must say we've had a very, very fruitful, a very thoughtful, profound discussion on this very disturbing and sensitive issue of the media this weekend. Thank you once again, Avtans Kumar, for connecting with us from so far off. And you have always been so kind to join us at short notice. We hope to have your perspective on Media Scan soon again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And Aarti Tikku, well-voiced journalist, strong in her opinions, but at the same time very clear about what she wants to do. Thank you once again, Aarti Tikku, for joining Media Scan. We have had you after a long gap, and I hope next time the gap will be shorter. Thank you once again.
All right. Thank you, Smita. Thanks.
Viewers, that was a really 360-degree rounded discussion on all that is going on in the Western media and the rest of the media in the world vis-a-vis Ukraine and the related issues. However, in the meantime, it is getting tougher and tougher to cover the situation for journalists there. People have been compelled to go back to the old style traditional mainstream media because due to lack of connectivity, digital connectivity and digital platforms are finding it extremely difficult now to cover the situation there. Be that as it may, it's time to pray for the best results to come out. We hope that all Indians are back in their motherland. At the same time, peace prevails in Ukraine and the rest of the world. All the world powers put together come to an agreement, and whatever is going on here is hopefully going to be short-lived. On that note, it's time for a wrap-up on Media Scan this evening. But do keep watching DD India as we continue to scan the media for you. Good night.